Hey everybody, what's up, man? Hold the truth hostage, where if the truth was so important, we wouldn't negotiate with lies, we would hold the truth hostage. Now, YouTube deleted my video on this, which I recorded called, it was the sequel to the dating simulation, which I called The Risk of Success. You know what I'm saying? Risk of successful dating. So, I'll just re-record it, but, update it. You know what I'm saying? I'll update it. And the thing you gotta understand, and it's funny, man. It's funny that I recorded something. I covered all this stuff 4 years ago, and now guys all over the internet are just talking about it. You know what I mean? It's funny how everything new to others is old when you've already been speaking about it for years. But the reason a lot of men will not be dating anymore, the reason men won't be dating anymore, and it's very simple. A lot of men are looking at dating as basically seeking to interview for an internship you'll pay for. You'll be paying. Think about it. Dating now for men is paying someone to work for them for free. You know what I'm saying? With all the risk implied. And that's what men are looking at it as. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to go meet up with this woman to pay her to work for her validation, and in hopes that she will hire me to be her man, so I can now be guaranteed that I'll be paying for her life while accepting all the risk that come with it. You know what I'm saying? That's what's really going down if you look at it from a standpoint of logistics. If you look at it from a very logical perspective, that's what's happening. And a lot of men are stepping away from that. And again, a lot of men also understand that the man she's basically dating, you know what I'm saying, dating has become basically just experience that either one of you can experience on your own. You know what I'm saying? And in the time we're in, where men work, women work, to go out on a date where you're seeking to pay for a dinner, a meal, you're seeking to spend about, let's say, 100 to about 250 for an experience either of you can experience on your own. A man can go to a dinner by himself. A woman can go to a dinner by herself. You know what I'm saying? Nothing about that experience is basically something you can't do from an individual perspective. And a lot of men understand now, it's 2025, that interaction with a woman, if you're trying to get to know each other, is two adults, you know what I'm saying, who don't know each other. You don't owe each other anything. The goal would be to experience getting to know one another, because that's the only experience you can't have on your own. You know what I'm saying? That's what's going on. And that's why the men, a lot of men online, you know what I'm saying, that don't have the, the logistics, you know what I'm saying? They're not, they're too involved with seeking female validation to comprehend that they're speaking from a female perspective. You know what I'm saying? They're not full-time ghosting. You know what I'm saying? They're too attached to the system to understand how they participate in it. So what's going on is a lot of men understand that now, it's consciously or subconsciously, and that whole 50-50 narrative, you know what I'm saying? The 50-50 narrative is just a lot of men that can't explain what I've just said, Because the truth is, between men and women, there's no such thing as 50-50. You know what I'm saying? Because the man, by virtue of being a man, will always be paying more anyway. Just him being around her, he's already paying more, because him being there basically makes him her protection. You know what I'm saying? Her protection, and any potential conflict that could happen, he'll be a target by default. You know what I'm saying? There's no such thing as 50-50. You know what I'm saying? Between men and women. The man will always be, you know what I'm saying, paying more by virtue of just being a man. You know what I'm saying? The 50-50 thing is just men not being able to articulate or understand what it means to be a man anyway. You know, there's no such thing as 50-50. There never was, there never will be. You know what I'm saying? Now, her pain for the certain things, you know, again, even if y'all split the bill, it's nothing you can't experience on your own. You know what I'm saying? What's going on is, another thing is, men understand, like I said, men understand with the internet. I used to say this a lot. I would ask men, if you're not faster than a cell phone call, you're not faster than a text message, you're not faster than a video call, then you can't basically comprehend or control anything. You know what I'm saying? That the woman you're with is doing. So what's happening again is, a lot of men, in understanding this, are also understanding that a lot of times they're basically the pit stop. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of men understand, if it was a Chad, a more handsome man, or man with more resources, whatever, you know, it wouldn't be at this state it's in. And another thing is, men understand that in the society they're in, you can't say anything. You know, we're at the point where, as men, anything you say will be held as misogyny, you know what I'm saying, and abuse. So that's another thing. But the men also understand that, man, there is, when it comes to a relationship, they have no authority at all. You know, they have zero authority. And like I said, it's basically, you're paying someone to be their intern, and they'll tell you to do whatever they want. And a lot of men, like I said, with today being 2025, divorce being at an all-time high, and one of the biggest things that, you know, no one expected, and put as something that was important, is that if men are not pursuing marriage or they're not pursuing marriage, then relationships are off the table. Long-term relationships are off the table. And a lot of men currently, with what they've seen with the court system and all that, a lot of men also now understand that long-term relationships are really building a case for a false accusation on them. The longer you're in a long-term relationship, you know what I'm saying, the longer you're building the case of, where did you abuse this person? You know what I'm saying? So a lot of men, to completely avoid this stuff, they're stepping away from it. You know what I'm saying? They're stepping away from it completely. And what's happening right now is that a lot of men are looking at the domestic landscape for dating, and realizing that there is nothing here, but seeking to be a walking wallet that will be abused. You know, a man paying to be an intern. And like I said, in the States, you can't say nothing. You know, a lot of men are realizing, you go out with a woman, you can't tell her how to dress. You know, you can't tell her to respect your wishes or anything. So a lot of men are realizing, well, you can't say nothing, you can't do nothing. Well, why would you even pursue dating? You know what I'm saying? And a lot of men are reading situations. They're looking at the popular culture of now, which is, you know, I've told guys this, we're nearly 20 years into the Kim Kardashian as an influence on the majority of women. as the girl next door has been replaced by Kim Kardashian. So we're about nearly 20 years into Kim Kardashian. What is it? She started 2007 with Keeping Up with the Kardashians. So we're nearly about 20 years into that. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of men understanding the side effects of Kim Kardashian being the idol of the mass majority of women now, and they're all dressing the same, tattooed, and as it's shown on the internet, what I'm saying, men can't say or do anything. It would be deemed misogyny and abuse. So the men domestically are completely cutting that out and saying, well, I'm not a misogynist, I'm not an abuser, and I don't want to be in a battle to defend my name or any of that aspect, so I just won't participate. And at the end of the day, the men know that they can't set anything. They don't have any authority or can say anything. And there's no such thing as privacy. That's another major aspect, is that privacy no longer exists. Men understand that now everything is about content. And when you can't tell a woman don't record, there's no level of respect from you would be asked if she could record anything. It's just they'll record anything they want, because as soon as you get in a so-called relationship or pursuing a relationship, you have no authority. There's no authority at all. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of men are realizing that, as I used to say, and I keep saying, volunteers can't be victims. If you know you have zero authority, you can't set any standards or anything, as that's deemed abuse. And domestically, you're in a situation where, by virtue of being a man, you can't tell a woman anything. And I mean, one of the funniest things, and I've seen this reaction for over, what is it now? Over 10 years online, damn near over 15 years. Especially now, you'll hear the women say, I need 6-figure man, 7-figure man, and all this. But a major question the men don't ask is, was your father making 6 figures, 7 figures? So if you can't care or love for a man, that basically means your father was a failure. You're basically saying your father who took care of you was a failure. You know what I'm saying? You can't care for your father because he didn't make no 5 or 6 figures. So you can't even care for your father because he didn't make 5 or 6 figures and he was a failure. Then how could you even care for the man that could become the father of your children? You know what I'm saying? It automatically disqualifies. All you got to do when the women say, well, as a man, you got to make 6, 7 figures and all this, all you got to do is ask, was your father making those? You know what I'm saying? Was your father making those type of figures? You know what I'm saying? And we all know there's a high rate of, single motherhood because, they all many of them choose a man that will basically doesn't want kids to begin with or isn't in a condition to become a father. So all you got to do to reverse that narrative, and I've seen it online many times, no man asks that question. You'll see these women be interviewed and they say, a man has got to make 6 figures, 7 figures, and no one asked, well, did your father make that? You know what I'm saying? Did your father make that? Are you saying live on camera that your father was a failure? You know what I'm saying? Your father was a failure, right? He didn't make 6 figures or 7 figures, right? You know what I'm saying? Your father was a failure. So if you can't, that automatically disqualifies her from any type of relationship. You know what I'm saying? Because if someone couldn't respect their father who raised them because, they didn't make 6 to 7 figures, then you already know they have no level of ability to be in a relationship or even qualify. You know what I'm saying? And another thing you'll see is that a lot of men have realized that sleeping around is now deemed a relationship. Dating is now sleeping around. You know what I'm saying? that's what it's deemed. And then we've seen the escalation of it. It's 2025, and you could search online where HIV and AIDS is skyrocketing. You know what I'm saying? Because after all, sleeping around is dating. So a lot of men are basically removing themselves, realizing there could be domestic abuse, an HIV, an STD. You know what I'm saying? And then you could end up on TikTok, because at the end of the day, you can't set any standards. You can't assume or set any standards of, hey, don't film me without my permission. Don't record me without my permission. You know what I'm saying? Don't take any photos without my permission. Privacy no longer exists. The men most of the time respect privacy, but not the women in these situations. So, and like at the end of the day, the men understand that if they're going out on multiple dates, they're the ones that have been set up to pay, to pay to entertain her while she awaits for the guy that doesn't have to pay so she can go sleep with him. So, that's what's going on. A lot of men are completely removing themselves from the dating scene because the men realize their position on the board. Their position on the board is to basically volunteer to pay to be around this woman until she can basically validate that they're so-called in a relationship. Even though men have seen with the divorce rates and everything, the cheating and everything going on, men have also realized that they're just the resources. If they are in a date, they're paying for all these dates. The woman is basically using his money to save her own so she can spend her money to go meet up with the man she wants to be with. So a lot of men are removing themselves from the board anyway. And another thing is men are basically, thinking and simulating what's happened. A lot of women think a lot of men, we're in the year 2025. Me Too happened in the 2010s. We know all this stuff. The Bear, we know Drizzle, we know all that crap. You know what I'm saying? But one thing the women just don't comprehend with what's going on is that men will think and simulate things. Men will think and look at things and say, you know what, I don't have to get burned to know that fire burns. You know what I'm saying? Men are looking at all the scenarios, all the situations, all the relationships. And since men, I coined it. I said this, before they were saying situationships, I called it the no-term relationship. Men understand there's no terms, in relationships anymore, since you can't set any standards. That means at any given time, an STD could be brought up because she could be sleeping with another man, and another man could be brought into the picture since she could tell that other man where you live, and things can happen. There is no security, there is no privacy, and there is no I forgot the word. There is no forget the word when it's just your woman. There's none of that. So the men have calculated and looking at this, and what's happening is the women who are basically trained to just, use their youth to just sleep around and enjoy themselves are not understanding. You could look at the numbers, over 60% of men are not even pursuing relationships anymore, anyway. And another thing is that, another thing that's going on is even the men the women want, they're not pursuing them anyway. Because another issue the women have is they never thought that a lot of the guys that you call a Chad, a Tyrone, and so on, they have guys that aren't like that. They have guys that are friends that are 5'8" or below. They have friends that are shorter than them or not as handsome or whatever. And at some point, one of the biggest issues the women don't think about is the guy they're into, there's a lot of times that guy wasn't always the tallest guy, wasn't always the strongest guy. So that means that guy who's 5'8" might be the leader of the guy that's 6'5". And so he's talking to him, he's giving him his perspective on life. And what's happened now is a lot of the taller guys, above 6 foot, are removing themselves as well, because they don't add up that those over 60% of men that aren't pursuing dating or any relationships, they're the guys that are also above 6 feet tall. You know what I'm saying? Or 6 feet. They're stepping out of the window too. And also the world is open. Men are traveling. And what's happening is that a lot of the women that are basically abusing their youth, you know what I'm saying, sleep around and all that stuff, they're reaching the age, because, the women have been taught, I'll have to do another video again, but the women have been taught to basically, you know what I'm saying, waste the years they could have with a man to start a family. You know what I'm saying? They're waiting to push it all the way. They've been trained to push their healthiest age to have children and a family, and wait until they're in their 30s or later, as in literally risk the life of a child. You know what I'm saying? And another thing before I forget, I should have mentioned this earlier, but another thing a lot of men are calculating and looking at is the fact that everything the women pursue is the elimination of resources, the elimination of resources for starting a family, the elimination of resources for having stuff for the children. You know what I'm saying? If it's, they won't cook, they won't clean, they won't do anything that will save money to benefit the family in the long run. You know what I'm saying? It's all about spend, spend, spend. And another thing, like I said, the men have no authority in a relationship. So if you were with a woman that's spending hundreds on, fake eyelashes and makeup and all that stuff, the name brand clothing, you know what I'm saying? And you can't tell her nothing to limit that spending, so you can now dedicate that money to raising and starting a family. Then you understand that the majority of women, basically, the way they talk now is, the children, we don't need a lot of money for our children. We don't need a lot of money for starting a family. We don't need any money. We should spend it. We should always operate at a deficit, you know what I'm saying, a loss. So a lot of men are realizing this, are stepping away, man. And a lot of men, like I said, domestically, now they say by 2030 it'll be 45% of women, but we're already at over 45%. By 2030, you're gonna see it at over 60%, because men, the laws haven't changed. This is to end it on a strong note, is that the women could talk all they want. You could suggest bringing back femininity. None of this matters. There's a lot of women making content claiming they so-called stand for men, but not one of the women with millions of views have started a change.org to change the laws or anything. You know what I'm saying? Not one. So a lot of the men know it's all talk. All talk. The laws haven't changed. Talk doesn't hold up in the court of law. So what's happening is many men are stepping away, and since the Chads and Tyrones are also stepping away, a lot more women are waiting a longer time just to get one night with Chad or Tyrone. So, or they just don't have access to Chads and Tyrones anymore. So a lot more women are just having access to just spending their money and their resources and then ending up alone. And to close things out, to end this video, is the truth they don't want to admit, and why are the women drinking so much, is that a lot of the women, when they live alone, they basically are sleeping and drinking. They're drinking to avoid the fear of being alone without a man in the household to defend them. You know what I'm saying? And another thing is, the women in today's society, the authority, the only thing they respect and they base their lives on are their jobs and careers, which, as we've seen, could basically close, you know what I'm saying, could go bankrupt at any time. You know what I'm saying? I've seen some women where They get in a position of power and act like it's guaranteed that this career she's working for the business is gonna be here for the next 20, 50 years without knowing that, yeah, you could be laid off at any time. You know what I'm saying? The company ran out of money. You could be laid off. But, it shows you that they're not focused on anything with longevity. You know what I'm saying? Think about it. A lot of women now are focused on the man who hired them, interviewed them for a job, rather than being with a man that can provide them a stable, long-term relationship. Because the truth is, she can't call her boss if it's not about the job. Then she can't call her boss certain hours. But that man she would be with, she could call him and count on him when needed. You know what I'm saying? So the trade-off now is the career. The career is the highest form of stability rather than the relationship with the man. So a lot of men consciously or subconsciously have realized this and basically stepped away from things. You know what I'm saying? But, I could go on a lot more, but, this has been Hold the Truth Hostage, where the truth was so important. We wouldn't negotiate with lies, would hold the truth hostage. Full-time ghosting isn't an option. It's the only choice. Full-time ghosts. That's another thing, is that men are full-time ghosting. Men are completely detaching themselves from relationships, as they are seeing relationships as, like I said, risk. Volunteers can't be victims. Men are understanding on a subconscious and conscious level that if you volunteered for this situation, don't expect any sympathy for what's happened to you. You volunteered for this. You knew the legal advantages the women have, and you can't say anything. You know what I'm saying? So a lot of men are ghosting, and a lot of men now are operating one way or another. Men are ghosting, part-time ghosting, sometime ghosting, but many men are being pushed. And I think by 2030, the mass majority of men will be full-time ghosting, where you just can't get access to a man, unless you're another man to talk or, game or, talk about some business and stuff like that. Women ain't getting access to men. And domestically, men are figuring out you could travel overseas for dating and relationships. So just like the women are basically saying they haven't been dating for years, which, translates to they've been sleeping around for years, the men will domestically be saying, as you've seen with the rise of the passport bros thing, is men will basically say, and I've been saying this for years, you could check it out, I got it over 4 years I've been saying it. What's going to happen is men will basically say, I don't date domestically. And unlike the women, which say they haven't been on a date for years, when the men say, I don't date domestically, that basically means these men will not pursue or interact with any women here domestically at all. Unlike the women that say they haven't dated for years, where they're sleeping around with domestic men, the men will basically say, I don't date domestic, as in they don't deal with women domestically at all. They only deal with women overseas. So a lot of women, what's happening is the women are getting older, and they're losing access to those men for anything, relationship, conversation, anything. And women are basically setting themselves up for something they don't even understand the price that will be paid. Just think about it, that a woman, let's say she's 21 years old, and she spends from 21 to about 29 years old just sleeping around, and she reaches her 30s and men are pursuing her in her 30s. A lot of women don't understand the risk they're putting in their lives, is that they're willing to sacrifice, let's say 9 years of their lives to ensure that they will be alone for the next 40 years. Think about that. Think about that. She's 29, and let's say she'll live to be about 70 years old. You know what I'm saying? Let's say she'll live to be about 70 years old. She will potentially ensure 9 years of her life to ensure that they will be alone for the next 40 years. Think about that. Think about that. She's 29, and let's say she'll live to be about 70 years old. You know what I'm saying? Let's say she'll live to be about 70 years old. She will potentially ensure 9 years of her life to ensure that for the next 30 years, you know what I'm saying? Let's say she might live to be 80, let's say 80. For the next 30 to 40 years, she will be absolutely alone because the older she gets, and a lot of women don't even know they can get infertile even before their 30s. So a lot of women are basically, the men are looking at you there's a high risk of the child getting sick, so they don't want to even have a family or start a family with you. You know what I'm saying? So there's a high risk of that. And a lot of the men are looking at things and saying that, you know, because of the high risk and all that, and the fact that they know the older you are, the more men you've been with. I mean, it's 2025, you know what I'm saying? So a lot of the women don't even understand that there's a high risk they're putting on themselves. And women could go infertile, you know, by 25. A lot of women are not learning that they only get a limited window to start a family. And now with men in 2025 actually saying a woman being 25 is getting too old for them. You know what I'm saying? Because the men are adding it up. They're adding up the amount of years you could have been sleeping around, you know. So a lot of the women don't understand that window to start a family and have a man that could protect and lead them. They're willing to throw that away to, you know, sleep around in their 20s and then guarantee for the next 30 to 50 years, if they live to 90, that they'll be alone. You know what I'm saying? They'll be alone. And another thing they don't bring up is that more women, you know, attempt to, you know what I'm saying, attempt to delete their profile, you know what I'm saying, than men. You know, more women attempt to delete their profile than the men. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you have a higher rate of men succeeding in deleting their profile. You know what I'm saying? But more women attempt deleting their profile than the men. So, you know what I mean? It's about to get wild. You know, they didn't add up by 2030 the amount of women that will be successfully deleting their profile. You know what I'm saying? Especially with all the stuff that came up, such as AI and, you know, men traveling and all that. You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of things that came that no one saw coming. You know what I'm saying? No one saw AI coming and the potential side effects of that. You know what I'm saying? Between men and women. So there's a lot happening, you know what I mean? And by 2030, it's gonna be wild, you know. It's gonna be a completely different world, you know what I'm saying? So 2030, I think, as much as they push this male loneliness scam epidemic, it's the women that it's gonna affect the most. Because once the men say that they don't date domestic women, you know what I mean? They only date foreign women, it's over. And that's increasing every day as this passport bros thing is, as I predicted, gonna be mainstream anyway. You know what I'm saying? What's happening right now, and I think the next 5 years, you know, by 2030, you're gonna see, you know, the passport bros is already mainstream, but it's gonna be very mainstream to the point where it's gonna be a talking point in the high schools, you know. It's going to be a talking point in the high schools. Then ghosting. Ghosting is already being talked about, but what ghosting you have now is sometime ghosting. Part-time ghosting is what you have now, part-time, where a lot of women will say the men flake, the men ghost. But what's going to happen is, and you see it already happening, where men are completely avoiding the women. They go to work, go home. Because something I said years ago is that men, and this is why full-time ghosting will eventually happen, and it's happening right now, is that men will realize that there's never a moment they're not working domestically. There's never a moment they're not at the job, that there's not HR. You know what I'm saying? The society they live in with false accusations and so on, the men are realizing that everywhere domestically is work. You know what I'm saying? You must behave as though you're at your job when you're off. There are no off days for men. That men are working every day. That's what men are realizing. There are no off moments. You're always at work as a man. You can't say or do anything. That what happens is when you clock out, it's basically casual, work casual. That's what society's become for men. It's work casual, right? You still can't say or do things like you're at home. Men are realizing the only place you're off is when you get home. You know what I'm saying? When you get home is the only place you're off. You're not working, is when you're at home. And then when you're at home, you still gotta, be careful a little, online platforms and all that, certain things you say or do. So a lot of men are realizing the only off place is home. You know what I mean? You see all these guys making these videos. Men want their peace. They can't explain. They don't have this level of, reasoning, this void of emotion. This is full-time ghosting, detachment from ideals. The only way, detached from the system, to think clearly. No system guides here, And what's happening is men are realizing, the only place men are off is when they get home. That's it. Once you get home, you're off. Once you step outside of that house, you're back at work. You know what I'm saying? That's how it works. So men are realizing the only place they're off work is when they get home. You know what I'm saying? So the men are realizing, oh man, I can talk, I can breathe, I can think, is when I'm at home. You know what I'm saying? It's not the whole peace, protect my peace crap you keep hearing. No, men are realizing, the only place they're off work is when they're at home. That's why more men are spending more time, especially when everything they go watch is telling them they're garbage. The Gillette commercial, you know what I'm saying? Every advertisement is men are negative, men are garbage, blah, blah, blah. The Bear. Men are realizing the only place they're off is at the house. So where do you think the men are going to spend the majority of their time? And especially now you got Uber Eats, you got ways to get food and everything. The men are realizing, yeah, man, at home. That's it, bro. At home. Home is where I'm off work. So, you know what I'm saying? To be off work, I'm going to spend my time at home, or I'll travel, overseas. And that's the other thing. What is overseas? It's outside of this country, which means you're off. The only way to experience being off work is getting home or flying outside the country. You know what I'm saying? That's when you're off work. You know what I mean? That's what the men are realizing. But this has been Hold the Truth Hostage, where the truth was so important. Wouldn't negotiate with lies. Would hold the truth hostage. Full-time ghosting isn't an option. It's the only choice. Full-time ghost.